Well, hi, I'm Jay Cross, and I've been involved in training and education for 35 years now. I developed the first business program for what became the University of Phoenix. I worked in the realm of sort of traditional corporate training for a long time, working with banks. And now I'm celebrating the 10th anniversary of being on my own company. For a while, I was very interested in just e-learning, and in e-learning wider definition, not the pejorative, if it's a computer, that's e-learning that came about. But in the last few years, I've been intrigued by informal learning. And now I'm looking specifically at implementation of informal learning, which involves having a partnership with the management of the firm and involves management innovation in order for acceptance to happen. So I'm very, very interested in that particular topic now.
I was a little confused about your answer you gave me to these questions. Think about what happens if you drop the in.
Yes. Here's why I said that.
I was totally confused.
In the very early days of e-learning, I was the CEO of eLearning Forum. And we'd have 30, 40 people from Silicon Valley show up.
Okay.
And all of them would start out, not all, but lots would start out with, well, how do you know this works? Or this will never be as good as Classroom. And in fact, we had Clifford Stoll, who had just written Silicon Snake Oil, come in and explain that nobody could replace his professor. And therefore, e-learning was junk. Well, we pointed out to Cliff that his professor doesn't scale very well, and unless education is going to be very elitist and expensive, that's not the way to go.
Okay.
And then I began to question, well, hold it. Why are you asking if this should be as good as Classroom? I mean, classrooms aren't available 24/7, worldwide, easy to record.
Right.
The thing to ask is, why do classroom experiences purport to be as good as e-learning? And it just, it stretches the mind to think about, well, what's the other side?
Okay.
And that's why I start with, take off the in. I don't think it's fair to say, well, prove to me this works, when most people who offer classroom training can't prove anything at all about the outcome of what they've done.
Okay, I got you now. I was just, What do you mean if you do say informal learning, and what do you not mean if you use this explication, informal learning?
Okay, I'll do part of this by demonstration.
Okay.
I don't worry too much about categories, so now I will mention a few things about my background that I left out. Like, I used to live where you live, in Heidelberg, and also in Wiesbaden, and my wife is from Braunschweig. And while I talk about informal learning, I've got good academic credentials. I'm not saying that formal learning is bad at all. I see informal learning as a part of a continuum of all learning.
Okay.
Formal, I think a classroom, often a lot of people at once, frequently it's graded or evaluated somehow, a lot of people together. Whereas informal, traditionally, there's no curriculum, there are no grades, and the motivation isn't, it's 3 o'clock on Tuesday. The motivation is, I got to figure this thing out.
Okay.
When people immediately ask, well, how do I know that? Give me some example of how that works. I go, well, how did you learn to walk? How did you learn to talk? Mm-hmm. How did you become socialized? Most learning's informal. It's not in school. So it's not either or. It's, if we paid more attention to the informal, we'd be probably better off because we'd be looking at the whole spectrum rather than just, workshops.
Yeah. So what would be a good example if you look into corporations to use informal learning instead of using formal learning? If you need to train, for example, the salespeople on a special product, does it make sense to use informal learning?
Well, first, informal learning is always there. I mean,
Right.
salespeople learn from experience and from talking with one another and from looking stuff up and
Yeah.
talking with people in bars. I mean, all kinds of stuff. It's just whether you pay attention to it or act like it's not there. Now, in sales, I'll take a few examples because I've worked with some companies in this area. And sales training, or specifically product knowledge training, is almost always out of date by the time you get it. The results are problematic.
Okay.
And a lot of the true learning is informal anyway. It's people saying after the event, hey, did you understand that? Did you get, is this right? Is this wrong? But if I look at, say, Cisco, which I know well, they've been a client, they provide information that's generated by communities of practice. Essentially, they bring 200 experts on a topic into San Jose. They have them talk, demonstrate, chat with customers, discuss things with product managers, days of this, and they videotape every second, and then they take it and they chop it into little pieces. And within a matter of weeks, it's available to anybody within Cisco, and they can see a picture, they can see a PowerPoint presentation, they can see a video, they can get a transcript, they can use it themselves, they can put it on an iPod, they can listen to it on their commute. This is a way that they're learning things, but they're learning at the time of need. They're not learning, 6 months before they're going to need something, because there is such a thing as a forgetting curve, which, I mean, when I was a computer salesman, I remember all too well. Oh, I used to know that, but, if you don't use it in a few days or a few weeks, most of it's gone.
Yeah.
Whereas if you learn something right before you apply it, it's sort of stuck in memory for a good long while.
You mentioned that you doubt the results of formal learning. What do you mean by this?
Well, I'm speaking only of the corporate sphere.
Right.
So I want to talk about adult learning, children, different matter.
Right.
If I look at a traditional learning environment, that's one of many things a corporation does to empower employees.
Right.
I mean, there are job definitions and making things available and setting up structures and everything. Training, most people by experience say, well, it's about 10% of what you can do to really change behavior. So we're dealing with a 10% chunk. Now, of that, I would say that 80% is probably informal. So when we're talking about what are we doing with the training department, so we're talking about 20% of that 10%. But then research after research finds that people only retain 10 to 20% of what they're exposed to in a workshop. And part of it's the forgetting curve, and part of it's they were really learning irrelevant things, and a lot of reasons. But then we've got essentially 15% of 2%, which is not enough to get anybody very excited about.
Right.
And doing better than that is, not that tough. So, when I think, or can't we do better than that by having collaboration, by having resources available that people talk about, by freeing up time that people can actually reflect on their experience, by making places that people can have conversations? Well, that's pretty powerful stuff. And in fact, you can go and ask corporations, which have done it both ways, or that are doing it both ways. Just say, ask the people who are actually performing and say, how did you learn to do this? And more likely to say that Sally told me than I learned it in such and such a workshop.